This video is all about arrays in JavaScript. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to create and use arrays as well as their properties and methods. So what are arrays? What are these things that you're going to be using almost every single day of your life as a JavaScript developer? Obviously, they're pretty important. So they're special objects treated with special key value pairs. Okay, these are not like the traditional curly brace object that you're used to, but they're similar. And they are objects under the hood. They're just treated specially by JavaScript. The cool thing about arrays is that they contain ordered values. So the values that go into the array have a specific order about them. Whereas with objects, you don't really have an order. You just store things by key and value. And then when you want to reference the value to obtain some sort of information about the key, you just reference it in that manner. There's a similar operation that we use in terms of what we do with arrays. However, the values are actually stored in order, okay? That order is a zero-based order, meaning 0 would be called the first index in the array. So all arrays in JavaScript have what's called an index at where the information is stored. So 0 will be the first index. 1 will be the second index, and so on and so forth. So this will be important at some point in today's learning, and then throughout all of your knowledge about arrays. So if this is one thing that you remember, I highly recommend grasping onto that. Zero-based indexes, okay? Arrays are mutable. We can change any item, we can add items, we can delete items in an array, we can update items, we can do all these cool things with items in our arrays. So that means that we can mutate them, we can perform side effects on arrays. It's really, really neat. Okay, so let's take a look at what an anatomy of the array looks like. First off, we can look at this in terms of what it looks like as like a plain old object. So let's take this array, for example, being set equal to an object whose key value pairs are 0 and then the first value 1 and the second value, right? So this is kind of how arrays are treated under the hood. If you were to peel back the array syntax when you're looking at it, this is sort of what it would look like and be read as in the JavaScript ecosystem. So we have that first item, which is that 0th index, the second item, which is the first index. And if we wanted to, we would reference them just like we can do in bracket notation. We would, with objects, we would reference their numerical value. So array at 0 is how you read that line on the left here, and then would return us the first value string. Same thing with array at 1 would return us the second value string, if that makes sense. So it's kind of how we look and we interpret this. That's how you reference items in the array. If you wanted to look at that array's fifth item, you would say, I want array at 4, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of just how you have to get used to dealing with arrays. Okay, so how do you work with an array? I love this analogy that I was taught when I first learned how to work with any data structure in JavaScript. An array is simply put kind of like a backpack. You have something that you want to store in that backpack, and you have a specific pocket for that thing, right? There's an order to where you're going to put that pencil, okay? So that way when you want to go and get that pencil, you know where it's at every single time. And you just go and grab it, right? So you can do this with anything. This could be a calculator, this could be a wallet, this could be a cell phone, this could be a notebook or whatever. You know exactly where you put it in that backpack. You're going to go and grab it. If you have to search, you may have to search through a few items or just all of the items in the backpack. But either way, it's a storage like a backpack. That's what an array is like. So there's different things that we can do to work with our arrays, especially in terms of accessing items, okay? We already sort of looked at this, but let's make sure we look at what the array proper syntax looks like. So if I was going to just hard code and create an array, I would do it like I would any other variable. Const, Hogwarts, equals, and then arrays have flat bracket syntax. Harry, Hermione, and Ron. And those are 3 items I have put into this array. So if I were to just grab this array, it would tell me that I have 3 items in there, and it would give me back Harry, Hermione, and Ron, and the ability to work with that array. Okay? We have to sort of conceptualize how this works before we dive into it with code, but don't worry, we're going to be able to do a follow-along exercise in CodePen shortly after we're done with these slides. So we have those items in that array. We can then reference that array like any other thing. Hogwarts at 0 would give me Harry, okay? Hogwarts at 1 would give me Hermione. Hogwarts at 2 would give me Ron. So that's how we can access individual indices inside of the array. Okay. So what's neat about this is if I wanted to take Hogwarts at 2, that reference to an item in that array, I could store that in a variable and then use that variable anywhere else in my code. So if I knew exactly where Ron was at and I just wanted to find and store a variable named Ronnie, I would just set it equal to Hogwarts 2. And then when I reference Ronnie, I could just pull Ron right out of that variable. Okay. Now that's important to understand, in terms of there is something found at that address in the array. And because I can go to that address to find that array, I can just, I can store that or I can capture that in a variable and then reuse that variable anywhere else in my code. Okay. So now we're going to talk about how we work with an array in terms of adding items. Okay. So let's say that we have our original Hogwarts array where we have Harry, Hermione, and Ron, and we wanted to add Dumbledore. Simply put, to add Dumbledore to the end of the list, end of the array, I would just simply push the string Dumbledore onto that array. What that's going to do is it's going to add Dumbledore to the end of our array. So now we have Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Dumbledore at index 3. Okay? Another way that we can add items to an array is what if we want to add them to the front of the array? And remember, order matters in the array. So if you needed to add something to the front of an array, you could use the unshift method. These are all found on the array.prototype, so you can use these methods as if you use any other types of methods on objects. You're going to learn all about the prototype this week, so bear with us for now. If I wanted to add Snape to the front of the array, I would simply just unshift Snape, and then Snape would be found on the end of the array. Cool. So now we have a little bit more of a complete array of more characters of the Hogwarts clan. But what if I want to go ahead and remove items from our array? Well, we have Snape, Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Dumbledore. At this point, we could actually use a cool method called pop. Now pop, it's a function just like any method, and it will actually just return to us the item that was removed from the array. Okay? However, what's cool is it will go and physically remove that item from the array as well. So just like we did with Ron, we could have created a Dumbledore value and stored it to Hogwarts.pop because this pop method returns whatever is found at that array. So it'll return Dumbledore, and then of course it will mutate the array so Hogwarts will no longer contain that last item. If I were to call pop again, after we've popped Dumbledore off this array, it would pop Ron off the array, okay? So pop is really good for removing items at the end of the array. To remove items off of the front of the array, all we have to do is shift. Shift will remove Snape off of the front of the array, okay? And then our array will look back to its normal form, okay? So there's other things that you can do as well. You can use slice and splice to remove items or add items, but we're not going to talk about those for now, okay? Or we will talk about splice for 1 second because it's important to kind of understand. All right. So if I go and use splice on this array, basically what would happen is I need to give it an address of the thing that I want to remove, right? So in this case, we want to remove the second index or the index at 1, okay, which is set to Hermione, and then how many items you want removed after that. Okay, in this case, we just want one item removed at this index, and it will remove Hermione. So in this case, Hogwarts would then be set equal to Harry and Ron. So it's important when we want to remove items from an array that you learn all about the intricacies of splice, and believe me, there are many, many more. Okay. Remember, arrays are mutable. The items found in arrays can be updated as well. So if I wanted to change Harry to say Hagrid instead, all I would do is reference the index and set it equal to Hagrid. And of course, we would get Hagrid, Hermione, and Ron. Okay. So other bits of info about arrays. They are very, very fast at retrieving a specific item. In fact, it will happen constantly at the same speed every time you go to get that specific item from an array. If I want array at 1, it knows exactly where to go to get that item and brings it back to you at the same time. So the time complexity of retrieving an item is constant. And that's going to be important when you get into computer science. Okay? The methods all live on the JavaScript array prototype. Okay? There is an array constructor, which you're going to learn all about this week, in the console. You can just go and type in array, and you can see all of the things that are on that array. There are dozens and dozens of methods that you can work with. So we recommend not only just using those methods here throughout your day-to-day, but also diving into the documentation and playing around with more methods. Being able to physically work with arrays is going to be a large part of your career as a JavaScript developer. All indices in arrays are numerical, okay? So that's also important if you're indexing an array and you end up passing the string 1 instead of the number 1, you may get some sort of error. But just remember, all indices are referenced as numbers, okay? To find something within an array, it's important to know that you'll have to search for however many items are in that array until that item is found. So if you're looping over an array to find an item and you're going to stop and return when you get there, it could be the last item in the list, which maybe there's a million items. It would take you that many searches to get all the way to the end of the list to find that item. So searching an array for an item is not very, very efficient. There are better data structures out there for that type of task. Okay. And then, of course, and I will always repeat this, arrays are mutable. You can change what's inside of an array. You can pop things off an array. You can shift things around. You can splice things in. You can slice things in the middle of an array and then move indices one direction or another. There's a lot of things you can do to mutate arrays and the data and the information that's stored there. So you need to remember that. Arrays are mutable. So let's see some code. Let's figure out what that's all like. So now you're going to actually pull open CodePen and you're going to follow along with me in the JavaScript console. Okay. We are going to be running some items through the console here. We're going to see exactly what it's like to play around with arrays. Okay. So the follow along exercise that's found here in your training kit says to create an array of your favorite things. Use methods like push, unshift, and splice to play around with your list. That's really it. We just want you to get familiar with these methods, and we can take it as far as we'd like as we get further and further into this. So I'm going to create my favorite things array, and I'm just going to camel case it to fav things, and I'm going to set that equal to an array. Okay. Notice there's a reason that I'm using const here. Okay. That means that I can never go and say fav things equals a string, right? This would give me a reference or an error at runtime. It's a syntax error saying, hey, you used const, right? So that's important to understand. If I'm going to add things to this array, we're going to reference the array and mutate it the way that it's supposed to be mutated. So just because it is a const, we can mutate the things inside this array, okay? Just like we can with objects. So I'm going to say favthings.push, and I'm going to put some of my favorite things in there. I love Mexican food. I also love Modest Mouse, one of my favorite bands of all time. I love baseball. Some of my favorite things are my wife and, of course, my son Haynes. So we'll just start with that for now. So I saved it, and if I want to console.log for my favorite things, we could take a look under the hood and see what it gives us. You see that I have this array with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 indices, and I have all of these strings added to that array. Okay. Now this is just working with an array of strings, so it's kind of futile. It's not very interesting. Remember that you could put virtually anything you want as a data set in there, as a data item. For example, if I wanted to do favethings.push and add a new array, I could just simply say this is going to be an array of other items. So if I wanted to say that on this new array I had an object as my first item, and name is going to be Ryan, I could virtually add an object to that list, an array of objects. I can add anything in this array. Okay, we're just going to keep it easy at strings for now and make things nice and simple. We'll clear that console. Okay, so we said to use push, adding some unshift and some splice to play around with this array. So let's say that, yeah, let's unshift some items in. So I'm going to say favethings.unshift. I forgot that I really enjoy video games. And I also really enjoy movies. Somewhat of a cinephile. Okay. And if I go and console log those items again, of course, we're going to get video games and added movies to that list. Notice, the order in which I added these to unshift was actually really important. Okay? So it added video games and movies in the same call in the order that it was found in the parentheses. Okay? So video games and movies are added onto that list in that order. Okay? It would be different if I added them like this. And I did favethings.unshift. Okay. Notice the order matters. I called unshift and added video games. It added video games to the array. I called unshift again and I added movies. It added movies to the array. Whereas before, when I had both of them, it just added them in the order in which they were given as arguments. Okay. So a little bit of intricacy there. You kind of have to work with it and make sure that you're adding things the proper way that you expect it to be added. Okay. So your list should look a lot like mine. You've added, your favorite things to your array. This is unique to you. And yeah, we're getting those things logged out to the console properly. But let's say that I'm taking a video game fast and it's no longer a favorite thing of mine. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this really quick. If I save it, I think it'll just run it. If not, I'm sure there's a run button somewhere. Maybe I need to change a setting. Give me 1 second. Settings. No. Go back. That was saved. So, okay, so settings. I'm going to go and behavior, autosave, all false. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to change is that auto updating and give me the run button. A little bit more exciting. Okay, cool. So now we have this list, but I have this item in this array that I'm no longer considering of my favorite thing. So I'm going to go and I'm going to remove that with splice. So I'm going to say favethings.splice, and I'm going to select the index of the item that I want removed and how many of those items I want removed. And now if I go ahead and save that and run it, it's going to take that first item and remove it from the list. Okay. Now remember, this is going to return something. So const first removed could be captured in a variable if you want it, but it's going to mutate the array. It's going to change that array for you. So I'm going to save it, run it, and we need a console log that's first remove. Save it, run it, and notice that when we actually get this back, it's giving us the array of that first item that we removed. Okay, so not only is it going to remove that first item, it's also going to create an array of that first item. It's like it basically creates a baby array of the mommy array. So it's like, I just want that one attribute from mommy. It's going to take it from it. So it's going to give us that. So you could do that. You can capture that in a variable. All of these methods because they're functions on the object, the array prototype, will return something. Okay, so it's up to you to figure out what they return and play around with that. I'm going to leave that there so you can play, so that you can have it on your screen. Okay, so lastly, let's play with pop. So I just want to remove that last item from the list. So I'm going to say const child will equal fav things.pop. And remember that we're going to capture that item in a variable so I can reference it later. And then when we actually console log this, that last item, Haynes, my son, is going to be removed from the list. And if we run it, notice that Haynes is gone. We still have video games. And yeah, pop removed Haynes from the list. Okay, and I could do the same thing with shift, which is the adverse. So I'm going to say const movies equals favethings.shift. And let's see what happens with that instead. Oh, we need to console log it. And there you have it. It manipulates the array. It physically goes and removes the items. And then, yeah, shift and pop are two methods that you can use to grab either the first or last item in the array. Okay. Now, there's so many other cool things that we can do with arrays, and the goal is up to you to figure out some of those items. But the last thing that I want to make sure that you're very well aware of, and it's a lesson in figuring out what the last item in an array is, because you may not know how many items are in the array, but you want to just look at the last item, or you may be looping with a for loop and you want to use that loop and you want to use the items in the array as placeholders for your start and stop for your loop. So you need to be able to figure out how to reference the last item in the array. So think about that for a minute. Okay. Well, there's one thing that we haven't learned yet, but we can get the length of an array. And the way that we get that a length is by using just by the array.length property. Okay, it's not a method. Things.length. Okay, and I'm going to console log that. So the array length can be found by just looking at the array's length property. So there are 4 items: Mexican food, modest mouse, baseball, and wife in that array. Okay, so those 4 items live there. They're hanging out in the array. And we can actually figure out what the last item is in the array. So remember, when we want to figure out the first item in the array, we can just say const first equals fav things at 0, because it's a 0-based index. So based on this logic, if we want to reference the last item in the array, what do we need to do? Well, the array's length is 4, right? 4 items. But the index of the last item in the array is always going to be minus 1 of the length. So that's a formula to find the last item in every array. Favorite things at, and then all you have to do is just type in fav things.length minus 1. And that's going to give us what? Think about it for a second. What is favorite things.length? And how could you figure that out? Well, the idea is that you're logging that out here and you have 4. So favorite things.length minus 1 is going to be favorite things at 3. Okay? And favorite things at 3 is wife. So that's the trick. This is something you're going to use all the time, so please remember it. So if I were to console.log last, save it and run it, that last item in the array is going to be equal to that. The way to find the last item in the array is by using favorite length, or by using the array's length property and subtracting 1 from it. Okay? And then you can just reference that. This is going to do some math. This returns a number, and then we just subtract it by 1, and that's how we get that last item in the array. because we're zero based. That's why you have to do this. So this would be the start of the array and the end of the array. Okay? So I hope you enjoyed tuning in with me, learning about arrays. I invite you to go over to the MDN docs for JavaScript arrays and look at all of the cool, neat things that you have available to you from the JavaScript spec. Okay? Look at all of these things. Figure out what a lot of them do. You're going to be working with a reduce, filter, map all over the place over the next couple days. Okay? So get used to it. Get used to playing with arrays. I highly recommend you learn why arrays are Ryan's very, very favorite data storage in JavaScript. Okay? There is a challenge for you to work through in Training Kit. So go ahead and work through all those exercises and play around with arrays further and start investigating a little bit deeper.